takers. I think the most important thing that we've learned is really, and this has been touched on by several presenters, is really making sure that you focus on what the user needs. We found very early on that making sure that, I think as Aaron mentioned, like what are the needs of your early adopters and how can you start to accommodate that to get folks on board, getting folks to use the systems early so you can start to get a critical mass of folks who are actually using the system so you can make improvements and start to make progress.
Just building on what Bob said, trying to focus on making people feel more effective at their job, make it easier for folks to do their job, and that's the way to win over the early adopters and the momentum in the system. So if you build a tool that makes someone more productive or able to accomplish things they couldn't accomplish before, that's 90% of the battle right there.
You must have learned something.
They're learning. Yep.
So I think, Aaron and I were talking about this, but basically just really kind of start with probably a smaller user group and then really define kind of what it is that you're looking for, because as Bob and John talked about, user needs, because if the user isn't going to use it, then essentially the tool is ineffective and it's not going to meet everyone's needs. And with that, if you have a large user group, you can get a lot of varying inputs, and then that can kind of build, or it can just kind of explode in what needs, trying to customize it to fit everybody's needs, because customizing a tool like that then in itself will become ineffective, because then there's just too much workflow processes going on. So, add to that.
Yeah, and I would say that, right now everybody has data, so anytime you're transitioning to a platform that you want to move forward with, you're going to have to deal with legacy data, and legacy data is both real value because it's it's seed for the tool, but it's also a liability because it's never in great shape, it's never in a consistent format, and especially if you're trying to bring data together from 11 different permittees, who've all been doing things in somewhat similar ways under similar permit requirements, but in different ways, for obvious reasons. That budget for the effort to get that data, because it's super important for people to see their data in there and see how much better they could be using it. But also resist the urge to. I think we struggled with whether or not we should be building like bulk uploaders so people could be doing a lot of these imports themselves versus just kind of one-offs for getting data in there. And so we had to strike a balance, and you really think about where we're at now. We're probably only 1/10 or 1/20, 1/5 of the BMPs we're even going to have in 5 years or 10 years. And so, in the future, most BMPs will come in through the happy path of people using the tool. And so these these kind of one-offs to start our work, they require legwork, and they require they require some creativity, but they're all part of kind of establishing that cycle of making people effective, as others have said.
Yeah, and I think I would echo exactly what they're saying. You need to have your users involved, and it's more than just having them involved and having a small user group, but designing software around them, around their business process, listening very carefully to them and how they want to do their business, making recommendations when needed to improve their business flow or process, but it all has to be designed around the user, and they should not see the technical difficulties of your software, that sometimes manifest themselves in poor design.
Okay, great. Oh, got a question over there. Oh, coming. Oh, no. I don't know. Oh, I thought you had a question. Oh, she does. Oh, yeah. Swear I heard something. So I think one of the things that you all have said is designing around your user, but I think one of the biggest challenges is that there's lots of different users. So how do you narrow down on whose needs are the most important? how did you deal with that?
I can take a stab at that. I mean, you're right. I mean, if you ask 10 different technology users what they want in a system, you get 12 answers. I mean, it's inevitable. But a tool we use in system design is really developing personas, where you kind of distill an individual down into kind of an archetype of what is your role? Are you a jurisdiction manager or a jurisdiction editor in the OC Stormwater Tools context? And it kind of makes it less personal when you ask your users to focus on what is the role that you're trying to perform, and what are the things you need to accomplish in that role. And then we're talking a little bit more abstractly about designing for an idealized user and kind of taking some of the personality and preference around it out of the equation, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's really necessary to start designing the interfaces and the tools around broader workflows and asking folks to recognize what's an opinion and what's a core functionality. And then we ask that where you're in opinion space, we can all have opinions, and we can all have personal preferences in our software tools. But I would ask my users to say that if we could agree that our number one preference is a preference for consistency, we can adapt to where the button's in the wrong place, or I prefer to do things in this order. Let's focus on making sure that the role that you're filling's needs are being met, and that we're building a consistent interface, and ask folks to adapt to that process. And I find that that's a pretty effective framework for building consensus in a large user group.
I guess I would add, we played the role of configuring what BMP types are we gonna have, what observations are we gonna ask people to collect relative to the condition, relative to maintenance, there's a lot of decisions that go into that, as anyone can attest, and so, you start with a solid understanding of the program, and I guess we came to it from a solid understanding of the land development program, as well as the W2IP, so you can help guide, some of those decisions. But then you do get to the point where, people have different opinions. Somebody wants to collect a lot of attributes, someone who doesn't want to collect as many. People want to use it for different, different purposes, and you kind of have to, we found places where, no, we all need consistency in this, and so let's have a meeting, let's get together, let's work towards, what John mentioned, which is what's our core need, what are our core priorities, and go there. And then other places where, where consistency isn't necessary, like we might expose quite a few parameters, but make them all optional. And so one city can say, I'm going to use this to track every last detail about my catch basin, because this is going to be my catch basin and trash screen, inventory tool, and it's, I want to be able to use it that way. And others are going to say, no, that's fine, the form is fine, but I just want to use it to collect the location, and maybe some, very limited detail about that. And both of those, in that case, both of those uses can be supported, and we're very agnostic about that. And so it's kind of trying to decide where you do really have an inconsistency versus where you don't. And with modern programming design, you can make a long form not overly burden someone by making it collapsible and stuff. So you can have that long form that's exposed for people who want to use it in a much more detailed way, but then not have it exposed to people who aren't. Which obviously in a spreadsheet you're going to make like real judgment decisions about how wide you let your spreadsheet get. With modern software design, it's just so much more dimensions that you have to work with to help bridge those trade-offs.
Yeah, so I would, every time we've initiated a project, you go into a room with the user group, and I'd say everybody has a different desire, and it quickly can grow out of control if you want to meet everybody's needs. But along the lines of what was mentioned, you do go in, sort of saying what users are going to do, what type of user are they, and then what are their priorities. So I try to prioritize, what's a really high priority requirement versus a like to have, in the future. And, once you work through that process and you analyze what they've requested, you can sit down, you can, start setting expectations. And, you may have this vision for a larger project, but you work incrementally with what's required initially and what the high priority features are and what those high priority design, requests are. And you make sure that you implement that according to, the needs and make them happy, and ultimately the rest will come, as it's implemented.
Okay, no, next one, coming.
Sorry, I'm so far away.
All right, yes, next step.
So it's real exciting to be able to use these tools and integrate and look and work with them. And I'm real interested in the functionality, kind of looking at technology, new technology and new methods that really make it exciting and user-friendly and interesting. So I'm looking at, in situ real-time monitoring. How cool would it be to look at the real-time turbidity of Lake Tahoe, or look at the most recent satellite imagery, or other techniques, even video of, watersheds and trash catch basins, so that somebody can just log in and get a quick look at what's happening in real time. I think there's a lot of value to that, but I know there's challenges on, QA/QC and security and other, concerns. But I was kind of curious what you're thinking on the next steps of the platform of bringing in the new technologies like that to enhance the user applicability.
You want to start? Go ahead.
No, I think it's, it is, especially as I mentioned, with sort of these open data initiatives, a lot of agencies are putting their data out there. We have lots of monitoring networks that are starting to get implemented across, various disciplines. And this data is made available. And I think that's where, if you have an open platform and you can put in the security protocols, to communicate with these other databases where the data has been made available through web services or, various protocols, then you can pull data in, into a unified interface for visualizing and analyzing that data. And that's something that, we've spent a lot of time doing those types of things in the past. So I think that's definitely the direction things are heading. There are lots of new, visualization tools that are available to work with big data sets and things like that. But there are, just various protocols that you need to have in place to deal with very large data sets and the security issues. That are opposed to making some of those connections.
Yeah, we've kind of built this with that in mind, that there's going to be some some data sets that help us describe the modeling processes, that would be much better than modeling. And one example, I don't know if you were in the open data session yesterday, but Drew Atwater with Mont Miguel talked about the smart watershed network that Mont Miguel Water District and the county are pursuing, and it would involve 60 real-time flow sensors that are continuously deployed in the watershed with the connectivity network of what drains to them, as well as the real-time water usage data in the network from Mont Miguel Water District. And so trying to build that continuously monitored data set that can feed, it can feed one thing, it can feed the baseline understanding of how much flow is at each outfall. It's a very hard thing to model. You can't model human behavior as to what's going to be at each outfall. And so from a stormwater modeling perspective, we can have reasonable confidence in our quantities and our concentrations. But from a dry weather standpoint, which is one of the priorities in Orange County, those data are going to be really critical for us to be able to drive that. And then developing the regressions between, and I use regression, sort of to include like machine learning algorithms that could help us relate the water usage data to the outfall discharge. Be able to use that to then say, think of all the incentive-based programs about landscape conversion and around efficient irrigation as, one thing that can be assessed with the tool. So building on that and using data to drive the modeling results. I mean, on condition assessment, I'm really encouraged with how low cost some of the LTE data plans and chips are, and so you could definitely see a point where your catch basins have a little ultrasonic inside of them, and a cheap ultrasonic that might be measuring the level of trash in them, and so you wouldn't be visiting them to understand the condition, but actually have your system aggregating and showing you a map of those that are in a state of needing. And some of this technology is already out there in pilot, and it's just a matter of making it more broadly available, but also providing the tools to aggregate those data in the same interface that you're using to make other BMP maintenance decisions.
I'll just add on the sort of implementation side of wiring up these systems, like where you're connecting monitoring data to a dashboard, or one user workflow system with another user workflow system to share data. It's a really exciting time because we're no longer in the business of building tools. We're in the business of building knowledge infrastructures where no agency is going to go all in on one platform or one vendor or one piece of technology. It's an ecosystem now, and how do these things talk to each other? It's pretty easy to wire systems together, like Jenna said, through a web service. It's hard to do it in a way that could be fault tolerant and clear about the roles and responsibilities of the different systems, so that you don't end up with competing systems of record, or system A goes down because it depends on data in system B. So you really do need to think carefully about not just can we make them talk, but can we make them talk in a way that the roles and responsibilities are clear and they're fault tolerant when one of the systems has some sort of outage or failure. And in the Tahoe Basin, we've worked with the Desert Research Institute and Geosyntec to build up kind of a pretty neat little workflow where DRI, the Desert Research Institute, is maintaining the actual sensor network. Geosyntec has built a process to pull that data in QA/QC and kind of validate it, and then the Lake Tahoe Info platform that I talked about communicates with the Geosyntec's QA/QC platform to show the data to the public. So each of those pieces is a live connection, and we've implemented them in such a way that they can be fault tolerant. We cache data and query it to see if there's new data, and if the system's down, we have the latest cache, and just be really clear that it's as current as it can be given the robustness of the different protocols.
Okay, got a question over here.
So it sounds like we're getting into data engineering here. So that said, has there, and obviously security being concerned, but has there been planning around, as these data sets get larger and you're doing, sounds like IoT, where you're having to connect, you're having consuming data streams, so has there been thought about other larger platforms like AWS or Google Cloud or now Azure that are offering that and ways to consume it more in a secure fashion, but allow you to have that fault tolerance and distributed computing?
Yeah, so for the systems that we've showed today, we're not yet in the big data category. These are, for the most part, systems where the data is entered by a human, and the human's not going to be able to type fast enough to get into big data territory. For the monitoring type data, yeah, when you're pulling in multiple sensor networks, we'd be looking at something like Azure or AWS. I think it's the Azure Redshift, is that what they call it, for their distributed large-scale data storage. So you need to go there. I mean, you're not going to want to serve multiple. You can do tens of gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes, pretty easy in a standard web application. When you're getting into the terabyte space, that's when you're going to have to use some sort of cloud provider to do that cost effectively.
Yeah, I think when you said like you need to actually, it sounds like scheduling, you need to put together multiple streams, you need that they don't lock and that they're not competing. And then also I think like the batching, if you're having the queue and pulling data, sounds like a good way, good use case for that. And maybe even consider also Docker. There's more virtual environments within Amazon where you can do that, and custom environments, things like that.
Yeah, Docker's great.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Anybody else want to take a crack at that? We got it on.
Unqualified. No.
It's almost a counter thought to data privacy idea, but what if any aspects of the system are fully open to the public? And kind of two-part, the second part, do you see in the future, opening up your systems to the public, and do you see benefit of that?
So at the moment, like Aaron said, we're still in the development stages of this tool, and so the inventory aspect has gone live, and so it was live in January, so we've had about 3 months to insert data. So right now, they were focusing mostly on the bulk uploads, and so the cities and permittees are currently going out and verifying all the data and ensure that the data that and so Aaron also talked about how we have the data verification process, And so as we're moving forward and as the permittees are comfortable with the data that they've inserted into the tool, then we're going to have a next steps discussion of what are they comfortable with sharing with the public, because it is, you know, we're all public entities, and the information is, you know, the public should have access to it. And so that is the next step, and the data, you know, there will be a process where information that has been verified and of course submitted to the regional board, you know, will be public facing, but we're still in the development and figuring out, you know, when to do that. So
In the Tahoe program, we took a two-stage approach. The Lake Clarity Crediting Program that I just scratched the surface on is pretty complex. There's a lot going on under the hood in terms of inspection data, model data, you know, the registration screens themselves, the subcatchments. It's a pretty Byzantine, you know, set of processes. And so we initially opened that up to our users, essentially to allow them the ability to track that information and to use it for their compliance assessment. But as everyone has grown more comfortable with the system itself and knows what the system shows and knows how understands how those pieces fit together, we have grown more comfortable with exposing that information, and we've actually recently just opened up everything in our system to the public. So we don't support at this point a broad public guidance as to what the information is. There's actually some really nice public-facing screens that can show sort of progress and some general information. And you know, if you start clicking around, you can find yourself down some very interesting rabbit holes that you may not understand. But nonetheless, at this point, it is absolutely all public.
Yeah, that's the thought. Is like, you know, another mind, third perspective might find,
You know, some deep solutions that we can't see because we've extended it for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we've talked about existing inventory, and the third kind of tier of this this project we're working on is towards planning, and so thinking about how do we create spaces for the municipalities to propose projects, to look at projects, and to take advantage of the future modeling module to evaluate them and get real-time feedback. And there needs to be a space for them to consider these behind closed doors, and to weigh them and to met them with their councils and so on. But there's also needs to be a space for them to share them with others, both within the jurisdiction, across other stakeholders, NGOs in the watersheds, grant funding agencies, where they can see the future proposed projects. So another reason why, besides just showing your progress and showing what you've been doing with taxpayer money, advertising what you want to do, and kind of trying to coalesce funding and coalesce partners around projects is another great reason to show, to have a public, certain data be public.
Almost all of our sites have some public components. So a lot of the streams that I was showing you are publicly available. You can go to any of these regions and pull up their Opti site and usually log in as a guest. So we do have, different users see different levels of information. So we do have some controls on what the public sees, and of course they can't edit, information or anything like that. And that's, specifically with the projects. When you start looking at their data, we have a whole other set of, comprehensive user permissions and privacy settings for all the data sets that the users, so we have systems where you can have multiple agencies using this database to manage all of their data, and each agency can specify what data is private, what can be shared within the registered user community, what can actually be published. And so they go through this process, and part of it is, part of the validation process that the data goes through, and then part of it is just what information do they want to release. A lot of the regions that we work with, they need the data to be shared so that they can, interact across boundaries and be able to share that data, use the same data for the modeling, use the same data for analysis, use the same tools so that the same conclusions can be drawn, from using that data.
More question? Oh.
Question for Southern Orange County. Do you anticipate using the information from the tool or the tool itself for any of the WQIP annual reporting?
Yes. So, as the third module is the planning and the reporting process, and so it would probably all the permittees as a yes if we, it's just to kind of streamline, basically all the information that, all the different program activities that they're doing, majority of it is going to be inserted into the tool. And so, of course, as this, to streamline and to be more efficient with reporting, it'd be ideal to do that. And so as we're getting into the planning and reporting module, that is something that we are thinking and considering.
And we also need to vet that and start having that conversation with the San Diego board, sooner than later, because there's some, that would be new, that they most, regulatory agencies want to have a paper file that they can come back to, and it hasn't changed, so you do have to reconcile the fact that, the inventory is never perfect, and it, you will retroactively populate it, an inventory, you will retroactively do things, and so, the need to maintain the snapshot in time at the time this was submitted, as well as the living, document, is totally possible. It's, it's just something to, start socializing sooner than later, because that's very much the intent.
Guess you can sort of ask Bob that question, even though he's different region. How do you feel about that?
I think the short answer is we use the system for reporting. I think that was a big driver, frankly, in terms of avoiding the amount of paper and the amount of information that they were having, that our jurisdiction partners were redundantly entering. So our board was very welcoming of that. The cautions that Aaron raised are very true. That said, we're somewhat unique in Tahoe in that we have a bi-state program, and so our system is essentially the system of record for both states. And so we had to do some thinking in terms of the amount of protections, in terms of when credits were awarded, when they were verified, what is hard, what's hard and fast once you push that button versus things that are editable and changeable and in some cases backdatable. But the compliance components of it are pretty clearly defined and provide us a really nice streamlined reporting process for that.
More questions? Well, I have some questions, so you're in luck. So I have a question about maintainability. So some of you may leave your positions, or maybe you'll lose a contractor or something. I know it's hard to believe, but it might happen, and it might not be there forever. What are your plans for long-term maintenance of these databases and these projects? Especially maybe losing some staff or something like that.
So again, I'll jump in just because our situation is somewhat unique. As I indicated, our system operates on both sides of the state line in California and Nevada. The Nevada Division of Environmental Protection is the regulatory agency on the Nevada side, the Water Board on the California side. We are fortunate that we have a bi-state agency. As referenced, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency is this bi-state entity. And so the Lake Tahoe Info platform, where our stormwater tools live, is essentially under that bi-state agency. So they are committed to maintaining that. They have a variety of their different programs that are housed in that. Again, what we showed today was just one module of what they do in that system. So we are quite confident that barring the implosion of the TRPA by somehow, that our system will maintain under that agency, regardless of who lives and dies in the water board and in the
I would just point out some advantages for an agency when you're looking to invest in knowledge infrastructure. That vendor lock-in is always a concern, and having, and I'm a vendor, vendor lock-in's a good thing for me, right? But as a ratepayer and a citizen, I'd look at agencies and say, hey, there are opportunities to have software that are owned by the community by the terms of the license. So make sure as an agency that your contracts specify that you own the data, and if possible, look for solutions where the technology can't go away and can't change, and there's some control over that. And I think that's just something that I advise agency partners, one factor to consider, so that you don't have to worry about the maintainability in terms of vendor relationships. Another factor I would look at is thinking of this technology as knowledge infrastructure. When you build physical infrastructure, you have to plan for O&M. The same is true when you're building technology or knowledge infrastructure. So looking at, there are ongoing costs to operate and maintain systems. There are going to be needs to adapt things over time as versions get upgraded, or there's changes in your workflows that you need to invest in. So just beginning to think about your IT budgets the same way that you think about your capital infrastructure budgets and making sure that you're on a sustainable investment strategy and you're considering life cycle costs and alternatives and really getting savvy about infrastructure planning is a really important way to make sure that the maintenance of this type of infrastructure is adequately accommodated.
So, with different tools, you want to make sure that people are using it and it's fulfilling different permit requirements. And with the regional permit, they said that there supposedly may not be that many changes, but we don't know. And so I think as part of the maintenance is just ensuring that the tool is actually assisting the permittees in fulfilling specific requirements. And so as requirements change, then the tool probably needs to be changed and customized as well. So those are kind of some of the things that need to be done as part of maintenance.
As I mentioned, this particular platform started about 8.5 years ago. So we have faced a lot of the ongoing, maintenance issues. All of a sudden, new web browsers come out, and you have to go in and adjust things, or new versions of Google Maps, or there's all sorts of things that happen. And so, we have been able to stay on top of that partially because we're maintaining a lot of versions of the software. When it comes to, as you mentioned, like vendor lock and things like that, we're very responsive to client needs and to agency needs. And so some agencies, it's not really a concern for them. We provide this as a service to them. They understand that they own the data. If we were to somehow, go out of business and disappear, they still own the data. They have, access to the data. We have other agencies who want to host the software on site. They want to have access to that tool to be able to make modifications. And so we do that. We have a number of agencies that actually host, our tools on their servers and can get in there and, make changes if they want to. So, I think there's a benefit on both sides. We do offer that as a service if that's what our client wants. But at the same time, we've been able to, maintain the changes over time to the software and continue upgrading and also, applying some of these new innovative ideas to other versions that are currently running and ultimately benefiting, everyone who's using one of these systems.
Just a comment going back to about machine learning. I really encourage it. We're at Caltrans. We ran it on our trash collection data, and it works out really well. And I think you guys are in a good place where it really comes down to data quality. It really comes down to good fit. Most of it runs as a regression, and so really about line fit. So you're starting in the right place, and I think once you get it, a lot of the work is the cleaning and the quality. And once you get it there, I think really running algorithm choice is minor. It's really that's the bulk of the work. So I think once you guys get there, it's just implementation. And I think even a lot of the tools these days are even like with Microsoft and Google are all like interface and very friendly, and they don't even have to require. You can almost like drag it off like Azure as a workflow tool, where you can go and build it, and then you run it, and then it's reproducible. Documentation is great, and then you get the results. And helped us out a lot with our trash control effort. So.
Okay, looks like we got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any other questions? Otherwise, I have one last quick one. What made you guys choose open source software? Quick question.
I think we talked a little bit about the benefits of open source. I think John's comments on vendor locker are good. We started off with some software that was less than ideal, that was essentially developed by a vendor for us, and we found a lot of challenges in terms of maintaining long-term contracts for hosting, for maintenance, for specific for having that vendor-developed and proprietary software. We found it just didn't serve us in such a way that the open software gives us a lot more opportunity to develop and craft unique solutions that don't pin us down to an individual vendor. We have a great relationship with Sitka right now. That could change this afternoon, we're not sure. and if it does, the software is open source, right? And I can go to another software developer and hand it over. And I think for the state of California, what is really gratifying, frankly, is to see the software grow. We've been very fortunate in Tahoe to have a number of resources to be able to develop these tools, to be able to see the investments that we've made in Tahoe, have legs and run down, all the way from the summit to the sea, right? In terms of actually actually going to different places and using that investment and seeing other agencies that don't enjoy the dearth of resources that we've had to be able to to take those tools and make different progress with them and see where they're going with that. That's the gratifying part. And again, as John noted, it's not totally altruistic, right? We're also saying that there's a bunch of different agencies doing that are taking the platform in different directions. And when they do something cool that's actually beneficial to the Tahoe Basin, we get that back. And we get that back essentially for free. And so it becomes this really nice open source community of software development and improvement where every time there's a change, anybody who's a part of that community starts to benefit from that. And again, it just doesn't lock you into a specific vendor. It allows you the ability to adapt and change over time and get the support that you need.
So, I think I've heard multiple comments, there are different various type of asset management programs out there. And I think the number one comment always here is that, oh yeah, I've used that, it's not very useful, but that's what we use and that's what we have. And so I think the main idea of this is to build our own customized, open source tool is that so we are customizing it to fit our needs to, implement the WQIP, which has very specific and unique, priority conditions that we need to address. And so the ability to do that is kind of the reason why we move forward with that direction.
Yeah, for us, building on open source tools was primarily done for the ability to develop very quickly, to meet client needs rapidly, and then also for maintainability over time. And as I said, client wants access to the source code, it's open to them, and they can use other vendors and modify it themselves if they see fit.
Well, great. Thanks, everybody. It is time for happy hour. So, I do have a couple of quick announcements, and then you